Right, so the Labour Party is tanking in the polls, and even though it has now been 5 years since he stepped down as Labour leader, all the Starmerroids have in the tank, it would appear, is yet another round of Get Corbyn. Yes, they have resurrected Corbyn bashing again. Yet again. There's a path through to popularity, they think. Yet after 5 years of seeing Starmer purging his party of anything resembling the working class and Labour values, leaving just a pale, beige and boring tribute act to the Tories, and what basically amounts to 5 minutes in government of breaking every promise and pledge they made to carry on with the very worst of the last 14 years of Tory rule. If all they can do after all of this time is come after Corbyn again and attack his attempt to present a government of the people for the people as he did, all they're actually going to do is remind people what could have been and how chronic the Labour Party now is under Starmer, and will forevermore now be an increase in resentment towards this government, more so than ever. Rock bottom, as that pretty much already is.
I found the experience of being in Jeremy's shadow cabinet absolutely bonkers, if I'm being honest. John McDonnell was the real leader of the opposition.
Then Shadow Chancellor.
No effort to build a team at all. It was shambolic. And I think that after Brexit, the constant uncertainty, Conservative ministers standing up and making these long, turgid speeches, and you didn't have any sense of where the government was going. I think it was a really unsettling time for a lot of people in politics.
Right, so that was a brief clip showing the patheticness of Starmer's current crop of MPs and government figures, I think. It's a classic example, I felt. Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander there was putting the boot into Corbyn, teed up ably by Nick Robinson, because of course she was, claiming his shadow cabinet was utterly dysfunctional when she was in it. And you look at her and listen to her and you think, well, with people like you in it, no wonder it was, because the Labour right would never work with the Labour left. And where many criticise the current Labour left now for being too quiet and demure and not challenging Starmer enough, it is what they've always done. It's just that the reverse is not true, as Corbyn's time as leader ended up proving. The Labour right stick together for their own ends, their own self-serving interests, and Alexander is a classic example of that. You see, where there are Labour giants, such as, for example, the late great Tony Benn, there are utter flops too, such as his son, the sock puppet Where's Wally, Hilary Benn, whom Corbyn sacked from his shadow cabinet for trying to orchestrate a coup against him, and yet another failed attempt to oust the leader the vast majority of Labour members wanted at that point. This became known as the chicken coup, colloquially anyway. Right-wingers essentially sacking themselves one after the other because they couldn't stand the democratic choice of the Labour membership, and Heidi Alexander was the very first one to quit following Benn. Well, it was good riddance to her, wasn't it? The coup failed as well. She then later left Parliament, having consigned herself to the backbenches, quitting her seat to become London Deputy Mayor for Transport. But now that Keir Starmer runs the party, whoa, she was soon sniffing back around for a seat, wasn't she? Moving from her previous Lewisham patch to Swindon now to do so. I'm not sure what her links to Swindon are, but there you go. Anyway, now that the Labour right are falling, in part in government, as people are reminded that they are as bad, if not worse, than the Tories, now they're back running the country, or ruining it, as the case may be. Having been a Labour member myself, do take it from me that the Labour right are some of the nastiest people I've ever had the misfortune to cross paths with. And with their polling collapsing faster than a Donald Trump defence case, they have wheeled out the get Jerombly crumbling again. It must be all his fault. How dare he get himself expelled from our party? How dare he still be an MP? How dare he have an allotment, or various nefarious reasons to that effect? I bet they even accuse him of putting too much sugar in his homemade jam. What a swine he is. But as much as I can point to dyed-in-the-wool Corbyn bashers with history like Heidi Alexander, it was another post dragging Corbyn's name through the mud, coming from a complete non-entity of an MP, that has generated much attention over the last week, and the MP in question might wish she hadn't bothered, quite frankly. The post came from someone I guarantee you will not have heard of, even if you possibly live in her constituency of East Kilbride and Strathaven, Joni Reid, who, like Hilary Benn, comes from much stauncher political stock, as it happens, than they appear to stand for themselves. She being the granddaughter of the late trade union activist and former Labour member, who later defected to the SNP because of Tony Blair, Jimmy Reid, who I will come back to in a moment, because it is particularly relevant, actually. Anyway, Reid the Younger, if we can put her like that, decided in a bid to look good to Starmer and co. and get noticed, which there's no denying she succeeded in doing, for better or worse. She ended up publishing a letter she'd written to Corbyn in relation to Ukraine, and it read, "Dear Mr. Corbyn, Donald Trump's overtures to Vladimir Putin have changed the global picture, and with them the stakes for Ukraine and its allies, including the UK. Given these developments, it is vital that every MP is clear about where they stand. Keir Starmer has been unequivocal. The UK will stand with Ukraine and provide the support needed to help them defend their sovereignty. The Prime Minister has made it clear that there is no scenario in which we would abandon Ukraine to Russian aggression. I am writing to ask you to set out your position on this issue. Do you support the UK government's commitment to backing Ukraine, or do you align with Trump's isolationist stance and his signals of appeasement towards Putin? There's no room for ambiguity on an issue of this magnitude. The British public deserves to know where its elected representatives stand on defending democracy and the rules-based international order. Given your previous positions on foreign policy and military intervention, I believe it is important that you clarify whether you and your independent alliance colleagues back continued support for Ukraine at this critical moment. Yours sincerely, Joni Reid." I really do hope the first thing Corbyn asked upon receiving this letter was, who? Every MP should set out their stall, eh? Well, it's funny, only your letter to Corbyn got published on social media, isn't it, Joni Reid? I mean, I assume all the Independent Alliance MPs got one of these letters from you, and every other party leader as well, because on an issue of this magnitude, as you put it, surely you are asking all of them and not just jumping on a "we need a Corbyn gotcha bandwagon 5 years too late" moment, because that would be incredibly small-minded and petty and ridiculous, wouldn't it? I'm sure you wouldn't agree with that. That this issue is too important to play politics with, isn't it, Joni Reid? Did you ask Nigel Farage where he stands? He's about as far up Donald Trump's orange peel posterior as you're clearly trying to be up the back end of Keir Starmer with this. Roughly at the point you can taste their teeth is my guesstimate. Should he clarify his position? His party is the one currently beating yours in poll after all. Or is it more about upsetting the left and having them coming out swinging for you? Because of course they will. And you can't attack Farage after all because you're chasing his voters, incidentally. What was done to Corbyn was to take away everything from people, every bit of hope that finally a politician had arrived on the scene that would put them first and the things they need. And after his destruction via the weaponisation of anti-Semitism, here we are again with you as a representative of the Labour Party, or what passes for it, that has now stripped all hope from ordinary people. And here you are demanding Corbyn, now no longer in your party, clarify his position on Ukraine, when Labour's current position seems to be about keeping on giving more and more money to Ukraine hand over fist, billions and billions and billions, as all of our services and our incomes get cut seemingly to pay for that, whilst refusing to rule out putting the boots of our kids on the ground in a war that by rights should have ended 3 years ago if Volodymyr Zelensky hadn't been so stupid as to listen to Boris Johnson and to walk away from talks with Russia when talks and negotiation are the only way to end any conflict. And I would bet my bottom dollar that that is Corbyn's position. Instead of making those same calls, it's more of our money and potentially the lives of British people being promised to Zelensky. And if the best you can do at this point is start beating Black Corbyn all over again, right now, your polling clearly hasn't collapsed half as far as it absolutely deserves to. Corbyn is not even a Labour MP anymore, and still you can't leave him be. Still he lives, rent-free, in your head. The determination by Keir Starmer to impose loyalist idiots as MPs has been underlined twice in red ink here, I fancy, under the name of Joni Reid. And that goes double when she talks about how clearly Starmer has set out his position. When should Trump flick the switch on him, he'd roll over on Zelensky in a heartbeat, because he's a serial liar who never commits fully to a single damn thing he says. And so in light of that, Reid's demands of Corbyn look even more ridiculous. But, most stupidly of all, is Reid's demands in light of who her grandfather Jimmy Reid was. You see, following his death in 2010, a man who turned his back on Labour due to Blair, and I can only imagine what you'd have to say about his granddaughter's adulation of a Blairite plasterboard offcut like Starmer, was that in his memory the Jimmy Reid Foundation was created, an advocacy group for social justice, for socialism in all manner of different ways in Scotland, to back real, progressive, transformative politics, the very thing Joni Reid as a Starmerroid MP does not stand for, therefore. Each year, a memorial lecture is held in Reid's memory in October. Last year, the Jimmy Reid lecture was given by Mick Lynch, but in 2016, it was given by Jeremy Corbyn. Joni Reid is literally attacking a guy who spoke at her own grandfather's memorial event. According to the Reid Foundation page in relation to this, Corbyn said, Jimmy Reid was one of the most outstanding trade unionists and socialist fighters that Scotland has ever produced. He led the UCS work-in, whose legacy is that we still have shipbuilding on the Clyde today. His message of the necessity of human dignity at work reverberates down the years and is a theme that I campaigned on last year and am campaigning on again this year in order to make sure that Labour represents the interest of workers. Corbyn, of course, had become Labour leader the year before. He campaigned, he said, according to this, on the same ideals that Jimmy Reid stood for. A Labour Party for the working class, for human dignity and for mutual respect. What a great pity Reid's granddaughter has so little respect for that herself, it seems, because Keir Starmer has done none of that. Has only ever been in it for himself and the wealth of his rich backers. He is a sellout. That's who Joni Reid is trying to impress here. Therefore, we should be utterly disgusted by this. Fundamentally, though, it shows that the Starmer stands have nothing to offer. Still, of course they don't. All they have left is saying, look, we told you this guy is wrong, but now you hate us because we lied to you about change and not about being a bunch of awful Tories in red ties. We're here to remind you why you chose us. Not because we represented anything different, but because we convinced you to hate this guy who makes jam and grows vegetables and wanted to make the UK more equal and everything else he stood for, even though it is everything you now wish you had. Every time they take a swing at Corbyn, therefore, it should tell you that this is all they have to offer you. It won't want to make your life better or easier. They just want to deflect away from blame, offer someone else up to hate. But we've done that. He's gone. The haters won in the end. And now you've got your reward for it, haven't you? Keir Starmer in government with everything that means. Corbyn is no longer part of Labour, and therefore these attacks should look doubly pathetic to anyone watching, no matter what their political leanings might be. It really is quite sad. What a bunch of saddos. It's just a reminder that there is no place for the left in Labour, and yet they still think you should support them as well. I've just got one message for these people. I'll leave it till right at the end of the video, though. Meanwhile, of course, the fallout of Ukraine has become more about Palestine, since brown-skinned people using a visa scheme designed for white people has caused quite the to-do in Parliament, hasn't it? Perhaps Joni Reid should clarify her position on Palestine, especially given apparent Russian asset Trump is so close to Netanyahu. How about clarifying that, Joni Reid? That would be good, wouldn't it? That seems fair. Every MP should clarify their position there, I think, but it's a mess for Starmer not going away, and all the details of that are in this video recommendation here for your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe before you do so, though, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new content published daily on this channel, and help support the channel at the same time, which is, of course, enormously appreciated. And I will hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.
He's still living rent-free in your head, doo-dar, doo-dar. He's still living rent-free in your head, do-da-doo-dar day. In your head all night, in your head all day. He's still living rent-free in your head, oh-da-doo-dar day.